on Zoom. The chat box, however, is not accessible to screen readers. So if you use a screen reader and would like to submit a question, you can do so via a form posted on the Access Women website and social media channels located in the post about this webinar. Just so you know, as also a part of the Q&A session, we've had a pre-submitted process where questions were submitted. We're going to answer a few of those today. But if your question does not get answered today, when we post this video in 2 days, we will also post the answers to those questions as well. As the racial justice organizer, I have the pleasure of organizing a group called Advance Your Leadership Power, also known as AYLP. Over the last few years, we have been working together to come up with solutions to alternatives to calling the police when in crisis or a meltdown. That being said, during an emergency, people with mental and behavioral health disabilities can be misunderstood. And we've seen how that can end tragically with police killings or unnecessary lockups. Right now in Illinois, if you need help physically, you call 911 and the ambulance comes to you. But if you have an invisible disability, like a mental health disability or autism, the police are sent instead, and they can escalate things rather quickly. The Community Emergency Support and Services Act, also known as CESA, will help create a mobile health unit to respond to these calls instead of police. HB 5009 and SB 3449 would include the response team that will be social workers, mental health professionals, and those who are trained to assess these kinds of situations that make sure that people get the supports and services that they need. Tonight, you'll hear from a few people who support the CESA bill, including our chief sponsors, Senator Robert Peters and Representative Kelly Cassidy, as well as some members of our AYLP group. And you will hear from Renee Watts, who is the sister of Stephon Watts, on her experience with how CESA could support in situations that occurred just like with her brother. So I would like to first introduce you to our chief sponsor, Robert Peters.
Good evening, everybody. I'm State Senator Robert Peters of the 13th District. Thank you, Candace. Thank you, Access Living, for doing this town hall. I first want to start off with a little bit about who I am and how I got here. And I'll just start with, I was born in 1985. I was born deaf and suffered a speech impediment. My biological mom was addicted to drugs and alcohol, and I was put up for adoption. This was in the midst of Reagan's war on drugs. And I was adopted by a civil rights lawyer for a father and a social worker for a mom. The thing for me is, as I struggled both in school and at home, I didn't have to go through that struggle on my own. I had a very strong community, and I was very lucky to have that community. But the thing is, for anybody to be able to get by in life, is that they shouldn't have to rely on bootstraps. They should have a community. And what we've seen over the last 30 years and 30 to 40 years is more and more disinvestment in our communities, and yet more and more policing. We've replaced, social services and good jobs with policing. And so for me, as a state senator, I've been in this role since January of last year. I believe that this is a moment for us to reimagine safety and justice, to reimagine community in the 21st century, and for folks like me in positions of governing power to be bold, strategic, and to be rooted and connected to the people who are doing the work on the ground. Before I got here, I was an organizer. And so I think about the fact that how do we move policy from the grassroots into the Capitol, and how do we move the Capitol to folks on the grassroots? And so this is, I was this bill is really an opportunity for us to merge grassroots power with governing power, and for us to start reimagining that safety and justice that everybody deserves. So, there's a lot of things here that, we'll get to the bill itself, but I think about just in terms of culturally where we're at. I visited about 16, 17 public schools throughout the district I'm in. And what I saw in every public school was maybe 3 or 4 cops or a couple folks who are security, but no social worker, no guidance counselor, no nurse, no librarian. And so you're a kid in a room full of 40 folks with nobody to talk to, and you're presented and met with the police, that is at a young age. We see this replicated outside of the school. You're going through life. You may have some trauma. You may have some things going on. And the person who needs to deal with that, whether it's mental health, whether that's physically, whatever it may be, is not a police officer. They are not trained to do that. They're not built to do that. That is not what they are about. What people need more than ever is someone who's going to look after them from a place of care and love and dignity. Say, how can I help you through this period of time? And instead of someone who's going to treat you as a threat. And so we have an opportunity with a flexible bill to bring that care and love and dignity to people's lives. I think that is utterly important. I think about specifically Charles Thomas, who was a U of C student, and the police officer who went to go see Charles Thomas, who was going through a very traumatic event. His first reaction was aggression, was to pull out his gun, and that's not what folks need. That's not what Charles Thomas needed. He needed someone to talk to him, to meet him where he's at, and to try to move him from that place of pain. And it doesn't need to just be a social worker. It can be, there's so much flexibility in this bill. It can be a restorative justice practitioner, someone who does de-escalation. The level of flexibility here is because when we think about what it means to be human, it means that we're flexible people. We're not robots. And so we must be dealt with in a flexible manner. And so right now, on a systemic level, we are in the midst of 3 very serious crises. The first one is a public health crisis that has put us in a shutdown for a long period of time, combined with an economic crisis where people are struggling to pay rent, or they've already struggled to pay rent maybe, but they're struggling even more if they lost their job. If they are working, they're not being as protected as they need to be. And then the third crisis is racism within law enforcement. What all these crises do have in common is that they create a great deal of anxiety, anguish, isolation, and loneliness. And so when we think about coming out of, when it comes to police reform and moving away from policing, we need to think about this as well in where we're at with these 3 crises. And that is, there are a lot of people feeling pain and hurt and sadness and anxiety. And it stretches and ranges from folks who are struggling when it comes to mental health, to folks who did not even think that they had themselves a mental health crisis and now realize that because of the world that we live in, because the world has pushed down on so many folks. And so this is an opportunity for us in the midst of these 3-pronged crises to say that we need to transition, from a harsh pushing down people to a place of pushing people up. And one way we can do that is through the CESS Act. And, I've just been told I'm at my 6 minutes, having been born deaf and having had a speech impediment. That means that sometimes I might talk given the opportunity, since I wasn't able to when I was younger. So thank you so much, Candace. Thank you, everybody who's attended. And thank you, Access Living.
Thank you so much, Senator Peters. I want to add that AYLP is a group that's made up of members from cross disability identity and from cross race identity, mostly centered on the South and the West Side when we started this process. And one of the things that we were recognizing when we were doing this work, we transitioned from restorative justice to tracking police encounters. And when we saw the numbers just continually to keep rising, um, one instance that happened really close to home for us was when Stephon Watts was killed. And so it is an honor today to have his sister on the line with us, Renee Watts, because Renee and other families who've been impacted by a system that doesn't have service for when a person is in crisis, they can experience some things that unfortunately this family has. So I want to open up the floor to Renee Watts. Renee, you're on mute.
There you go. Thank you guys for attending. Thank you, Candace. Thank you, Charles, Curtis, Access Living, and AYLP team and members for putting this together and being with our family for so many years and being there to support us at every step of the way of getting some sort of what we would think is justice for our little brother. Stephon was 15 years old when he was killed by the Calumet City Police. But I just want to give some context of who this person was. He wasn't just someone who was killed by the police. He was a very loving little brother. He was a very God-fearing person. He would go to church, Sunday school. Even if he misses school, he will go to church. He will be at Bible study. He will be in service every single Sunday because that was his passion, including working on computers, gaming, coding. He taught himself how to code. Even though I'm in IT, he taught himself how to build computer games on his own. And he was very quiet. You know, he was diagnosed with Asperger's, so he wasn't a very social kid. He wasn't someone who went outside and played and interact with other children. He had his family and he had his church family, and that was it. That's all that he knew. Under the, my mother had him under, he had insurance with the Illinois Kid Care, which is now called All Kids in Illinois. And during his IEP meetings or the meetings we had with his social worker, they told us when Stephon is in crisis, that we have to call the police. The reason why we have to call the police is so that way he is transported to Streamwood Hospital. We could not take him to Streamwood Hospital ourselves. We could not call the ambulance company ourselves and have him brought there. They said, hey, he has to come by police because that is the only way the ambulance will show up. We were told several times that the police were trained to deal with someone who is going through a crisis like what Stephon would go through, and that they would safely get him to Streamwood. The first time that the police were called, they did treat him with care. They did dispatch a hostage negotiator to get him to come out of the house on his own. They were there, they listened to us as the family members. They even allowed me to go into the house to talk to Stephon, to de-escalate him and to calm him down so that way he would leave. But after that interaction, they began to become more and more aggressive with Stephon. The hostage negotiator disappeared. We never saw him again until he was killed. But the next time they tased him, my mother complained about that and said that that was excessive and they did not need to do that. And he was asthmatic, so she was concerned of him having an asthma attack from that. But the last time that they were called, my father called them. He called the non-emergency number. So he did not call 911. He called the police precinct number himself. When he was on the phone with them, they said, "Is this the home of the autistic teen?" My father said, "Yes, it is." So he felt like, okay, they're gonna come and he's gonna be okay. By the time they arrived, he said, "I don't need you anymore. He's calmed down, situation's over, you can leave." At this time, six squad cars were outside of my home. My father said, "Okay, if you guys insist on coming in," because they said they have to check on Stefan's well-being. "So if you insist on coming in, only 2 officers can come into the home to check on him." When the 2 officers came in, my father said, "Stefan, where are you?" Stefan said he was downstairs in the basement. So my father starts to walk downstairs with the basement with the officers. He said, "The officers aren't here to hurt you, Stefan. They just want to talk to you. Okay, is that okay?" He said, "Yes, that's okay." So when the officers started to come down the stairs with my father, Stefan came around the corner with he had a jacket on. So he had the jacket over his head as he was coming up the stairs. One police officer saw him, fell down the stairs, shot Stefan. The second officer that was standing at the top of the stairs also shot Stefan, and that was the shot that killed him in his back. From that situation, it's been very hard to have family functions. It's been very hard to get my father to even wake up. I'm sure a lot of people on here are parents, and they understand that if something like this were to happen to their child,
Renee, you may be having some technical difficulties, so we're going to come back to you. Um, First of all, just doing this work, we know that we didn't want any instances like this to occur again. One of the things is that people experiencing a mental or behavioral health crisis are not as likely to be able to follow police orders when officers try to control the scene or make it necessary to give commands to people who are experiencing crises or a meltdown. Um, this bill, the reason why AYLP wanted to create SESA was to prohibit that same experience that the Watts family has had for other people. Um, on the South and the West Side, there are a lot of people who are Black and Brown who have um, different types of disabilities. But when we're in a society that is very ableist and don't understand where people are coming from, and where we have systems who are making decisions off of medical terminology and what they assume can happen to a person, um, really puts into place systems that don't really work for us. And so I want to introduce Curtis Harris for him to actually talk about his experience with what he thinks is best for him and how SESA can support that. So I give the floor over to Curtis Harris.
All right, my name is Curtis Harris. I'm with Access Living. I'm a person with autism and mental health problems. I support SESA because it's important to me to have community choice and the right to pick where I go to get care. It's important for people having mental or behavioral meltdowns to have community resources that don't involve having police called. When I'm having a meltdown, I'm very anxious and stressed out. I have racing thoughts. Police make those symptoms worse. A few years ago, I was suicidal. When I called the suicide crisis hotline, they sent the ambulance and the police. It was really scary for me and for my dad. They searched for weapons and for drugs, and then took me to the ER. I was in the ER for an entire day before I got care, and they then transferred me to a psych ward over at UIC. I did not like being in a psych ward. You're on lockdown. They don't understand my dual diagnosis. Now, when I need help, I go to a place in my community. It's called the living room. When I go there, I'm seen right away. There are people there to talk to me about what I'm going through, and there's peer support people who know what I'm going through and can relate to it and to me. They understand my autism and my mental health problems and how I'm impacted by both, which was my experience in the psych, which I've been there 14 times in 10 years. Now, CESA, I know, will allow more people to get to choose where they will get the help they need. And I had experience of getting not shot. A police came by to our apartment with a gun off. He told me, get out or he'll shoot. Looking for drugs. Fortunately, they didn't find drugs in our apartment. They found it in the basement of the building we stayed in on the west side. I still had trauma experience with the police. Now, knowing will CESA will limit the need of police, but I've been doing an advocacy project on crisis intervention training for partners in policymaking, in which the officers will be trained to handle people with intellectual and developmental disabilities when are caught in traffic and police tell you to pull over. And I just recently had a meeting with my alderman and the chief of the mayor's office for people with disabilities. For the mayor's office, Lori Lightfoot. She won't meet with us before July 24th. So the best I can do is just me with her chief of staff, which I did, and turn into the Illinois Partners in Policy Making. And I really hope CESA will end calls to the police and remove them, because when you call 911 for help to go to the emergency room, police comes by. And that further stigmatizes the mental illness. And you don't want that. Because I experienced that 4 times with thresholds. When I was feeling like I wanted to hurt myself, they would call the police. 911, and ambulance and police came. So I'm not gonna go through. I don't want to go through this again.
Thank you, Curtis. One of the things that I want to say about this bill, that is another fact, is because there is no robust and community level support for people with mental or behavioral health emergencies, creating one will provide better support for individuals impacted and reduce the cost of supporting people in an emergency room during a major crisis. It is more effective and provides greater dignity to provide mental and behavioral health services in the community, especially now. One of the things that we don't get the opportunity to talk about a lot is the intersectionality of how race plays a role into the support that we get. As communities of color, both Black and Brown, we just experience trauma on various levels that has a lasting effect on us as individuals, um, but especially for those of us who are a part of the disability community. And so we think that SESA, one of the ideas is for the regional emergency response committees to create um, committees that will have people with lived experiences and those who are a part of the emergency response team to actually create a plan for people who have mental and behavioral health crises that will include ideas from folks with lived experience and from people who have the expertise to create those plans. One of the situations that we've heard about within our group comes from one of our members. Her name is Sophia. And so I'm going to give her the floor for her to tell her story about um, how she thinks that SESA will support. Sophia?
Hey, hey everyone. My name is Safia Ishijasi. I'm a 15-year traumatic brain injury survivor, and I'm a member of AYLP. And if the SESA bill was already in place, my situation would never happen. So wait, hold on. I kind of forgot. Okay, so my granny had died in 2012, and she was the only living grandparent that I had at that time. And it really had like an effect on me. And it caused me to be numb and distancing myself from everybody else. And so I was spending a bed for a week straight. So my sister had came and checked on me to help get me out of bed and just to interact with other people. And it it was kind of like a back and forth. So my mom had called the ambulance, and the ambulance came, and they told my family that there wasn't nothing wrong with me. So my family took me to the hospital, and on my way to the hospital, the police was there, and they transported me into like the hospital bed. But while they had strapped me to the hospital bed, and the police officer had pressed his head hard on my head and neck, and remind you that I have traumatic brain injury. So any kind of pressure, it could have disrupted my brain. And from there, I was transported to the hospital room, and they gave me a shot. And then so I woke up the next day. I felt fine because I was in the middle of having a silent seizure. So I felt fine, and I asked them I wanted to go home, and they told me that I couldn't go home and that I need to go to a psych ward. So they transport me. Oh yeah, I was at the University of Chicago Hospital, and from there they transport me to Mercy Psych Ward, and there they gave me some type of medication, and it caused me to stop having thoughts for 2 years. And it really impacted like the way I do things, because like I'm an artist, I like to write. So that medication, it really put a damper on how like I communicate with people and what I want to do for myself and my business. And then so like I support the SESA bill because I just feel like if the SESA bill was in place, like this situation, there would have been an alternative, and all the excessive force that I received in my situation would never happen to me. So yeah.
Thank you, Sophia. I want to introduce our second chief sponsor, Representative Kelly Cassidy. Um, would you like, Kelly Cassidy,
Yeah.
you have the floor.
Thank you. I was having trouble figuring out what buttons to push. First of all, I want to apologize for being late. I had a friend who needed some help with a medical situation, and I had hoped to time it better, but I'm glad to be able to join you, and want to thank Sophia and others for sharing their stories, because quite honestly, this is an excellent example of where stakeholders need to drive the policy making. We need to understand what the needs are of the folks that we are serving. We can't dictate that from where we sit. And so hearing more folks who are on the receiving end of bad service or good service helps us drive better policy. And so I'm really proud to be part of this. I'm proud of working with Access Living. Senator Peters and I get to do a lot of really cool things together. And this is one that I think, frankly, will save lives. It's just smart policy. And there are times when I look at some bills like this and think, this is just common sense. Why haven't we been doing this all along? And I hope that in a minute, when we get back to our work, we look back at this and say, good, now more people will do this too. Because I think that this, unfortunately, it's all too clear how important this is now. And I am sorry that we missed out on a full session, because I think we would have had a good chance to pass this year. But I believe that the momentum is on our side, the energy side, and with all of us in direction, I get this done. I have to add, but I'm happy to be available for questions, and really looking forward to getting this done together. And I just got a text that my connection is spotty, so I apologize if I'm hitchy in my presentation.
Thank you, Representative Kelly Cassidy. We really appreciate your support. Before we move on, I want to give Renee the floor and ask her, how does she think that the CESA bill would have shifted her family's experience on behalf of Stephon Watts? Renee?
Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on with my computer right now. You guys froze and I just got back into the chat.
Were you able to hear my question? How do you think the CESA bill would have helped support your family?
Well, I think it would have been a huge help for us, because we would not have needed guns in our home. We would have had a medical professional who has been trained to deal with people in crisis to come out and to assist my little brother de-escalate the situation and bring him to Streamwood Hospital safely.
That's a good point. Instances like this are happening across the country, and there are a lot of national conversations about what's appropriate in response. One of the things that we've been looking into is a model that includes a mobile assessment unit that includes a crisis intervener, a mental health professional, a nurse, and a person that stocks information or referral on what's in the community that's available, so that when a person is in any type of crisis, that could be homelessness, needing to eat, being transported to certain places, whatever people need on the spot in that moment, they have those people on a team. And so AYLP has been working diligently to educate community members around this idea that we should have a more community-centered approach to when people have crises or meltdown. And so that includes creating space for robust community services and supports, and creating a network for that information to be shared. A lot of you all who had experienced a story within these situations stated that you all had to call 911 or that you had to call your local police department. But CESA can create a world where you can be able to call your local emergency response team, and they can have a list of services and supports that are available instead of just relying on different systems, especially the ER for crises and for police to respond. Before we transition, there are a few questions that were posed to this group in this panel, and so I'm going to get into that. One of the frequently asked questions around this bill, and before I actually answer, I want to let everyone know that Charlie Petrov, who helped us draft the language. The way that we went through this process is that we had a series of meetings and community town halls and listening sessions with different people who gave their input, and Charlie helped us draft the language. And so I want to have him chime into some of these Q&As just in case people want to get really technical about where the bill fits in certain areas. One of the areas that people ask a lot in our FAQ session is, how does the CESA bill actually impact the involuntary commitment process? So Charlie, I'm going to turn it over to you to answer that question.
Hi, my name is Charles Petrov. I'm a senior attorney at Access Living. I generally focus on litigating cases under the Americans with Disabilities Act. But for 3 or 4 years now, I've also had the pleasure of working with AYLP as they have considered what they would specifically want in this bill that we now call CESA. AYLP is quite convinced that involuntary commitment needs to be avoided to the greatest extent possible, and that it can be a violation of a person's right. So the bill says that the response service it creates cannot interact with the involuntary commitment proceedings in the state of Illinois. And the bill says that its language can't be used in any way that might increase the chances of anyone facing involuntary commitment. The purpose behind this, from AYLP's perspective, is that the mobile responders need to be trusted service providers in the community. And the people who can receive that service need to know that when they see them, they're not facing the potential abuse of involuntary commitment. That's our position on that issue.
Sorry, I was talking without realizing I was on mute. Sorry. Another question that gets asked frequently as it relates to this bill is, does the bill define what professionals are best fit to be first responders in crisis intervention or de-escalating a situation?
This bill is a general requirement that every part of the state of Illinois have some sort of mobile response for mental or behavioral health crises. It also has some fundamental rules about what that response should look like. Outside of the fundamental rules, the bill requires that each of the state EMS regions convene a committee and that committee be made up of the people responsible for responding, but that it's also made up of people with lived experience and work out the individual details of how the response will happen in that area. The idea was that Carbondale may have very different needs than the city of Chicago, and each area should be able to respond to those particular needs. And that each part of the state might have very different resources they can rely on. So the design here, to go back to Curtis's example, could be that for Curtis, a mobile response can simply help reach out to him if he was in crisis, help him de-escalate, and then help him get to the living room where he already has an active relationship.
Thank you. Another question is, how will the proposed emergency response alternatives ensure that individuals with self-determination is protected over and above enforcing behavioral norms or ugly laws where there is no injury or threat?
One of the general requirements of the bill is that the responders have to respect the care choices of the people they're serving. Again, recognizing that in specific communities, there may be only certain sorts of care choices, the bill requires each EMS region, through its committees, to work out the precise details about how to do that. But the requirement in the bill is that the choice of the person being served is respected.
One last question. How will this be funded and what will it cost?
The information on funding suggests that this bill is actually going to be a savings for the state system. That by reaching out to people at the beginning of a mental or behavioral health crisis, we can provide care and support that restabilizes that individual at a drastically lower cost than if we do, as we're doing now, which is simply to wait until the problem becomes so extreme, we end up admitting people into emergency rooms or keeping them in hospitals for extended stays or providing them with expensive medication that they don't want, that all eats at the state budget. So we've looked at the federal SAMHSA administration studies, and those studies have looked at the question of the cost of a mobile response unit in a couple of ways. One way just looks at the immediate cost. They get a call from someone who's in crisis. How much does it end up costing if you have a mobile response unit? How much does it end up costing if you don't on day one, before you have any further health consequences for the individual? That study found that having a mobile response unit saves the state about 23% of their mental and behavioral health costs. So we opened this up and we saved the state money. SAMHSA, however, did a follow-up study. And in that follow-up study, they tracked people's situation for 6 months after initial call for emergency help. And what they found was an actual 79% savings to the state if they had a mobile response unit. It's suggesting that not only in that initial crisis does the state manage to help people back to a productive life a lot faster, but you help them back and they don't have another crisis immediately after that takes additional work from our state. So all the information that we find suggests that the state of Illinois can redeploy money here from hospital emergency rooms to mobile response units, save the state money, and give people in Illinois greater dignity when they're experiencing this need.
Thanks, Charlie. In addition to that, we living in the city of Chicago, there are a lot of lawsuits that have come out of the experiences of inappropriate response to people who have disabilities. So when we're talking about cost savings, if we had a different response system, we could be helping in an area of not having as many lawsuits and being more prepared to be supportive of people with disabilities in crisis and meltdowns. I want to add and remind people that if your question did not get answered during this session, we're going to take your questions and answer them under the video of this live stream in a few days on our website at www.accessliving.org. I also want to take the time to thank everyone who has been in attendance. One of the things I want you all to know is that this is a robust system. It's a complex topic. It's something that over the years, many stakeholders and many people with disabilities have had this conversation multiple times. And we know that the accessibility bill is just a piece of that conversation. It's not something that can solve everything, but it's a step towards the injustices that people are facing. And we know that one of the things that we want to do as a call out is to invite people to be a part of our coalition to help figure out the solution that SEPA can provide, but also to help build that network. The SESA bill is something that you would like to support. We are going to be releasing a cap quiz, which will be sent out. You can sign in on Access Living's website and submit your email, and those emails will go out to legislators who you want to ask to support the SESA bill. Other ways that you can get involved or give your comments is that you can contact myself. I'm Candace Coleman through my email, which is also on the website. And if you want to get involved in being a part of our coalition to make sure that SESA is successful. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. I want to especially thank the members of AYLP on this work of this bill. I want to thank those who shared their stories. I would also like to thank Senator Peters and Representative Kelly Cassidy for being active in supporting this bill and joining us tonight. We really need everyone's support to make sure SESA becomes law. Again, just to reiterate, if you would like to be involved, please register at Access Living's website at www.accessliving.org for our advocacy alerts. And tomorrow we will email you a simple way, which is for our capitalists to contact your state legislators online. Thank you for your time tonight. And again, support SESA. Have a good night, everybody.